And good morning, everybody. Congratulations. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, amazing products, coffee that Austin and I are enjoying this morning. And a lot of what we do in food safety goes unnoticed. It goes unheralded. So if nobody else says it this week, Austin and I are going to say it for you today. Good job. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. So if you're new to the chat, pull up a chair. We're going to talk for an hour all about food safety and everything that revolves in that world. If you're new, welcome. I'm Brian Armantrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every week at this time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, we do a live stream. And with this, we have a conversation. And what the regulars know here, this is not a lecture. This is bringing an expert on to share their knowledge and make things a little bit better for you, because it's all about the connections and sharing information, because food safety, not a point of competition. We're all in this together. So if you're someone who has been a regular attendee on the chat, you know the cadence. So the next thing I'm going to say is, where are you at? And I am in beautiful Loveland, Colorado, where it's hopefully a little cooler here today. It's been pretty warm out here. And Austin, of course, is in my neck of the woods. How are you doing today, Austin?
Doing well, man. Yeah, I'm over in Denver, so about an hour south of Fort Collins, and enjoying the fluctuations of it's really hot and then it rains and it cools off, and so it's been a nice summer so far.
Yeah, I was in Toronto earlier this week, and oh boy, was it hot. And so when you're from out west, it's when you go to a humid environment, it hits you twice as hard. So, out in a very humid environment, you're just like, oh my gosh, it's just not something that's very fun, but it makes you appreciate the weather here in Colorado even more. Good to see Cortland this morning. Good to see you, sir. So let us know in the chat, like Cortland has done, where you're logging into in the world. I'm always amazed where people are from. So, of course, if you're someone who attends the chat on a regular basis, you know the gentleman who's joining us. And the work that Austin is doing at Sage Media is really, really good and really, really important. So I'm very happy to share his messaging and his approaches with you guys. So this is going to be a very educational hour. And I think in a lot of ways, it's going to kind of blow your mind, because how you approach food safety and how you approach training is critical. If you can't train people correctly, everything it's just words on paper. People have to be able to execute against that. Good afternoon, Duncan. Good to see you, Duncan, of course, across the pond. So nice to have him joining us as well. So we were laughing here as we were getting ready for the chat. So everybody get ready for this, a dad joke. So Austin, how does NASA organize a party?
I don't know. How do they do that?
They plan it.
Oh man, come on.
Oh, I love those.
Is this going to be part of the opener now?
We'll see how it goes, guys. If you like the dad joke, let me know. If you don't, same way, and I'll tell more dad jokes. So you're
That's awesome.
So before we get started, we've got a ton of stuff to do today, and it's amazing content of what Austin is doing. So please, everyone, join us. Drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers. Wonderful. Hey, Duncan, it looks like you misspelled behavior there. That's poor Pluto.
Duncan's continuing on the dad joke.
It's true. They don't. So first off, Austin, why don't you give everybody kind of a little overview of Sage Media and what you guys do?
Yeah, definitely. So started Sage Media a little over 10 years ago, and really the easiest way I explain what we do, because it is a bit of a different business model, it's like a trifecta or a Venn diagram of different things that we do. And one is obviously learning design. So we are a learning design company. We build out a lot of training around food safety culture. So that's one circle. The other circle in the Venn diagram is video production. So we utilize video production and storytelling as the primary modality to educate people and to really drive conversation and critical thought. And then the third circle is research and cognitive science. So do a lot of research around motivation theory, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. How people learn, the neuroscience of media. So how can we leverage media in a way that better connects with learners? So I really like to look at the scientific backing of how we can train and drive behaviors better so that I can utilize that academic research within our design of these learning programs where we're really looking to drive behavior.
That's a good point. And you said something there I wanted to definitely emphasize, because in quality in any type of a technical field, if you want to improve a process, you have to measure it. And, a lot of times in the past, and we'll get into this more as we kind of get through our chat here today, is, you do some training with somebody, you show them some PowerPoints and you sit them in a room and they really don't want to be there. And at the end, of course, what happens? Here's the test, right? Take the test.
The test.
And what's funny with the test is a lot of times it hasn't been rewritten in 10 years. Right? And so the people who have been around, they're like, hey, answers, B, A, C, A, B, B, right? And everybody knows the answers and they fill it out. The trainer thinks they succeeded and they're fooling themselves. All they're doing is creating paperwork for an auditor to look at. It's kind of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really why my mantra that I repeat over and over again is that knowledge does not equal behavior.
Yeah. Oh, yes. And I love that. That's a fantastic way to think of things, guys. So if you write down one thing here from our talk, and I'll put it in the comments as well, does not equal behavior, BHAVIOUR, for our friend in.
You putting the U in there?
There we go. How's that? Behavior. You need a good accent on that too, right? Knowledge does not equal behavior.
Yeah. So that's, one of the big assumptions. And it's easy to make that assumption because we're raised in this academic environment, right? This academic world where success is measured by, did you pass the test? But when we're looking at corporate learning or workplace learning, the knowledge is not what's important. It's what do you do with the knowledge? How do you implement the knowledge? Because knowledge does not drive KPIs. Behaviors drive KPIs.
Right. And as Duncan points out here as well, is incentives equal behavior. Sometimes, right? Because there have been studies on this where if you give people monetary reward, hey, here's your raise for this year, or here's a special bonus, there's diminishing returns on those type of activities, especially if they're repetitive. It's like, okay, every year I get a 3% raise. Every year I see my bonus at this time of year, and it's always this amount. And it just becomes part of what's expected. It's no longer a reward associated with that. So you have to be very careful with how you set up those incentive programs. It's amazing how these little things work. So a company I work with, yesterday, one of my team did a great job working through an issue with FSVP and FDA. And she asked my advice, and I gave her the advice, and she executed against that, and we were successful. And so she was very happy to report back to me and say how those things went. And I said, congratulations, you earned 2 puppy dog print emojis. And I put those in the chat. And she loved it, right? That was her reward for doing that work. And it's silly and it's goofy, but it's amazing how those little things motivate people, right? I think it's more of the idea, and recognition and these type of things help too, of just, my recognizing her effort and her ability and her skill in this area and saying, hey, good job. You did a good job. And that's part of the reason here on the chat, Austin, why we do that. And it becomes part of that recognition program for people who don't necessarily get a lot of recognition.
Yeah. Yeah. And Duncan, talking about the incentive side, that, what's interesting about incentives is that, they have to be continually maintained, right? Because as soon as that incentive is no longer there, then the behavior will also usually disappear with it. So the incentive has to be consistent. And we'll talk about a little bit about that later in the talk of how to leverage, internal motivator, right? Because when, incentives and things, punishments and rewards are this extrinsic motivator, this external motivator, right? I engage in this behavior because I want to gain a reward or because I want to avoid a punishment, which, like I said, that behavior will stay there as long as that incentive or that consequence is there. But once it's taken away, so the question would be, how do we tap into that internal motivation to behave in a certain way or to do this job? And so we'll talk about what some of those motivators are so that you can incorporate them into the training design to speak to that internal motivation of like, well, I do this because this is who I am, or this is how I self-identify my place in the world.
Yep. No, you said a lot. and with that, for technical people, because as we talk about here on the chat quite a bit, Austin, is there's two skill sets to be a successful leader that you need to have. There's the hard skills. There's, here's what I know about microbiology and how the plant works and piping and valves and engineering and all these things. That's great. And those are all important things. And what we constantly emphasize here on the chat is the people side, as you advance in your career, becomes more and more important. And people in quality and other technical fields need to really understand and leverage what you're talking about here today. So pay close attention to what Austin's got to talk about. So with that, I wanted to kind of, at least for people who don't necessarily know how these processes work, and I referenced this a little bit in our opening as well, is there's kind of a standard model of how training works in the food industry. This has been, I'm an old dude, and this has been this way ever since time immemorial. When I started, this is how it was done, and this is how it's mainly done now, except for people who have worked with you, is you will have a PowerPoint. And it may have been a PowerPoint that was written before you even got there. And there's a PowerPoint on GMPs, and there's a PowerPoint on how to wash your hands, and you name it. And generally, the quality manager is a person who's writing these, and she puts them together. And then when you look at the standards, it says, for your training programs, you need to do da. And you need to measure your training. So quality people sat around and said, oh gosh, how can I measure training? Oh, I'll give them a test. I'll give them a test at the end, and that'll show that they were paying attention to the information, that they understand what these boring slides were telling them. And boring slides, they generally are. Quality people are quality people, and they create these slides, and they're absolutely jam-packed, beginning to end, with words. And because we want to be very precise on what we're teaching. And then they're read to the group. Every year in the United States, there are approximately 76 million cases of foodborne illness. Associated with those illnesses are thousands of deaths. The main regulatory industry is FDA. FDA operates under... right?
Yep.
And they all go the same. They all go the same. And training takes place in plants when everybody's like, yay, let's go do some training. No, it's not. If you're the quality manager, and generally, Austin, this is how it gets managed in the production facilities. Hey, guess what, quality manager, you're the person responsible for training. And you're like, why? Well, you do all the document stuff, so you're the training guy. Okay. So you're doing the GMP training, and you're doing the hand washing, cleaning. And if you get stuck with it, you're doing the OSHA training for lockout, tagout, and everything else. And you got this massive list of trainings that need to be done in the plant. And let's say you got a plant of 250 people. Now you got to wrangle all these cats and get them in for this training. And with GMPs, it's required under 21 CFR 117 as part of your food safety programs that you do GMP training annually. So you're like, oh crap, I got to get everybody through GMP training annually. So Austin, if you're the supervisor in the plant, and I'm coming to you and saying, hey, Austin, it's time to train your team. We need to get everybody in for GMP training. And you're out on the floor and you're working and you're making product and you're doing all kinds of stuff, getting the orders out the door. And your first response in your head is, oh God, I don't have time for this. I've got to make 10,000 cases of product for this order. We're behind. The equipment is down. Oh, and you're like, what? It's like, yeah, your team needs to be trained. And let's say you have 15 people working for you. Like, well, I can't pull my people off the floor for an hour training. That puts us way, way behind. I'll send some people by at the end of the shift. Right? And as a quality manager, you're like, ugh. Because you know what's going to happen.
Because that's when they're most attentive, is at the end of the shift.
If they even show up, everybody boogies to their cars and they're out of there. So you're running around begging people to come to training. And then there's people who are on vacation. Mm-hmm. And there's other people who don't think that they need it. It's just an incredible headache. And everybody in the plant looks at it as busy work and something that just needs to be checked off. And the quality manager, being quality managers, we're very good at being persistent and getting what we need done. So it creates this really difficult dynamic in the plant. And if you're not cooperating with me, Austin, as the supervisor, after a while, I'm going to get pissed and I'm going to the plant manager and complaining, right? And now the plant manager's like, Brian, right? It's just right. So now the quality manager is just this, trying to get these things done. And with this is why when you and I first met and we started talking about these things, you brought a brand new perspective to all of this. And it was outside of that box, which is exactly what we need in this industry. And it's really going around this training piece. And the first part of that I wanted to dive into is what you're talking about when these programs are laid at our feet, is really designing of the training. And what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, and you kind of hit on that earlier, which is people have a tendency to build out a PowerPoint and then cram as much information into the PowerPoint as possible because they don't want to miss anything, right? There's the idea of, right, the devil's in the details, and we got to make sure that they have all this. And this gets back into one of those three circles I was talking about earlier, right? And that's cognitive science, right? Mm-hmm. So how do people consume information? How do we make sure that as they're consuming that information, that it's actually doing something, that it's driving them towards the behavior that we are hoping will happen? And, you know, there's this concept of cognitive load, right? Mm. And cognitive load is, you know, if I am overwhelmed by too much, then the brain just says no, right? Nope, I don't want to do it. It's too much. The caloric burn, right? You know, going back to my ancient ancestors, the caloric burn is too much. Screw it, I'm out. Yeah. And so then we're actually doing the opposite, is that there's so much information that's being presented, and then now nothing is getting accomplished. I mean, when I go to food safety conferences and watch the presentations, I could start a side hustle just in like helping design PowerPoint presentations, because it's so much information on there. And I think people really miss the opportunity to use the tool for what it's meant to be, which is a reference tool, right? Whenever I go to a presentation or anything like that, I want to hear from the expert. I don't want to just read off of the PowerPoint and then hear the expert reading it verbatim, right? I want context. I want story. I want to find ways to like connect this back to my life. And so I think that's one of the it's a big issue that we see, is just the lack of baseline learning design principles, and I think, one of the things you said is that a lot of people will be told, hey, you create the quality and the safety documents, therefore you can create the training. And It's like learning design is a whole other field of study. I mean, you can get your master's in it, you can get a PhD in learning design. There's a lot of great research and work that goes into the field of learning design. But I think that's lost a lot within the corporate world, is because, once again, the assumption is that if we give them the information, then they will do the thing, right? But knowledge doesn't equal behavior. So just giving the information is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's,
Yeah.
and that's, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
And so that's where we're really trying to focus on is like, well, how do we create the training in a way that creates behavior? And when we talk about that behavior, that's when we get back into what we were talking about earlier with Duncan, right? And motivation. And how do we motivate and speak to the motivators of people? And really it's, I mean, and this gets back into what your sales team and your marketing team, really focus on, which is what's in it for me, right? Why do I care about this message? Why am I connecting with this in the first place? And I think when we talk about behavior, I think I see people get a little squeamish sometimes because it's like, well, that's this, soft sciences, and that's different from microbiology or chemistry or anything like that. And so this is kind of, this nebulous area, and it really isn't. I mean, it's definitely not microbiology, but whenever I talk about identifying behaviors, the two key things I'm looking for is it observable, right? Can I actually see the behavior, and is it measurable? Because so often what we see as a learning outcome, right, is that someone becomes aware of, right? I can't measure awareness, right? I can't observe awareness. But whenever I specifically say within this training, the learner will engage in this behavior, as a verb, right? What is that actual thing that they have to do? So if we're looking, washing hands, if it's cleaning procedure, what is the actual behavior look like? When I'm doing stuff for finance team or mergers and acquisitions, it's like, we'll spend X amount of time doing due diligence around the safety of a company that is being acquired. With sales, so all of this can be tied back into the specific behaviors, but I noticed that sometimes that's hard for people to identify because we're so trained to think about training as simply the execution of information to people. Mm-hmm. So it's just making that mind shift away from, well, first of all, what's our in business goal? What are we aiming for, right? Why are we doing this training in the first place? Begin with the end in mind, because I think, a lot of times training can be a knee-jerk reaction, right? There's some kind of failure, and so it's like, oh, well, we have to retrain, or it's part of the onboarding, or it's, so like you said, it's this thing where it's like, we just got to check this box to get done. But actually going back and saying, well, why are we doing this in the first place? What is the actual measurable business goal? Because we can't get funding for any training unless we prove our, effectiveness. So that's kind of like step number one, is identifying what that specific business outcome is, and that, what KPIs are tied to that. And so that, so I would love to find out, like, from people that are listening right now, when you think about a business outcome that you're looking to drive as a result of training, what are some of those? Like, spitball some of them out there, and we can kind of workshop some of those ideas, because while we're on the call, we might be able to just solve someone's problem for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so if we think about it, in the food industry, there's, some types of trainings, Austin, that are common to everybody. So as we had referenced earlier, GMPs, right? You have to have a clean workforce, and you have to have no germs on your hands. You have to wear your hairnet. You don't do this. When you go to the bathroom, there's behaviors that you have to have, and those type of things. But to your point, it comes back to why, right? And when the employees are going through the training, that why is really important. It's like, you need to wash your hands. And if they're kind of looking at you like, you're assuming that their frame of reference for their knowledge is the same as yours, and it's not. And really, maybe we can kind of talk about that GMP piece of it. So if I'm a quality manager, and if anybody else has any topics as well, yeah, jump in. So if you're going to be training me on GMPs, so with that behavior side of things and the outcome with that, how would you approach that with me?
Yeah, so GMPs is a great example because this is something that everybody struggles with. It doesn't matter if it's a multi-billion-dollar global organization or a mom and pop. Everybody really struggles with GMPs. I think one of the, going back to hand washing, right? Because hand washing is, within the GMPs, hand washing is a very consistent issue as well. And so, I was just talking to my partner about this yesterday. We were like, what we should really do is create almost like a TikTok style videos just for GMPs, but, make it so that it leaves people guessing how the story ends, right? It could be a little 30-second story, but it's, what I was kind of spitballing is, we show someone at the, deli counter working, and then they go to the bathroom, and then we start to see them walking, towards the door or the sink in the bathroom, and then it just cuts, right? And so you don't know which decision they make. Well, now you have a conversation piece to talk about. So now we have people talking about hand washing because there's curiosity. What did he do? Did he do the right thing or did he leave? Why is it important, that he washed his hands? So, leveraging curiosity, and that's what storytelling and why I personally am so drawn to storytelling as a learning modality is because curiosity is the greatest internal motivator we have, right? Curiosity is that scratch that needs to be, or that itch that needs to be scratched. And I can't force you to be curious, but I can set up the conditions in which you are becoming curious about something by how I structure that story or that training. And so when we look at those GMPs, because just going through and telling people, right, you need to wash your hands is not enough. You can get into the why of it and why it's important to wash your hands, but then getting people to talk about it, I think, is a really big aspect, because when we talk about food safety culture, a culture is what it talks about, right? It's what it places value on. It's what's important to them. It's what we end up talking about, right? If all of my friends are huge into the NFL and all we talk about is sports, that's the culture that I am embedded in, right? And because that's where we place our value and our what we find important. So, for GMPs, I think the biggest thing that I would like to see is developing more curiosity around this, because these are very interesting topics. As you start to learn, I've always been a rabid hand washer, but that's because not because I knew about the microbiology or the chemistry or anything like that. It was because I just don't like having stuff on my hands. But there's some people that it doesn't bother them, right? So they don't feel compelled to wash their hands consistently like I do. So those are the people that we have to speak to, because they don't have that, internal drive to just wash their hands consistently. So it's okay, well, how do we start to develop that curiosity around why this is important?
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, if you're in a food plant, and let's say you're working in the maintenance department, right, and you're dealing with gears and metals, and right, your hands are dirty all the time, and your nails have all kinds of gunk under the nails, and that's just you're used to it. That's how your hands are. Working with those guys to make them understand the why. And I was laughing to myself with the curiosity piece of this, and I think a really good example of this. Well, kind of two things. When we watch a TV show, we don't watch a PowerPoint of a TV show. Okay, so on this slide, the protagonist enters the room and finds a dead body. And then you go to the next slide. Here's the evidence that was identified at the scene. Step one, there were fingerprints on a glass. Step two, no. But I think one of the best examples I can think of about the curiosity piece is, remember in the 1960s, Austin, the old Batman show. How did that show always end, right? And they were half-hour segments, and they were two-parters, and it would end the first act, the first section of Batman would end up with Batman and Robin in a horrible situation. So the Joker would trap them, and they would be on the rack, and they're tied up, and the saw is coming, and the saw is coming, and then the narrator cuts in and says, "How will Batman survive? Tune in next week for the next bad adventure," right? And then next week, of course, when it starts, they get it out of it very easily because he pulls out the bat utility saw stopper,
right,
which stops it immediately. But that hooks you because you're like, oh crap, I got to see how this ends. This maybe that's the episode where Batman finally gets it, right? And
that's the origination of binge watching, right?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the way that TV shows are created. Now, you know, binge watching is, you know, they release the entire season. So it's like, how will Batman get out of this? And it's like, well, I'm going to watch the next episode immediately because now I'm hooked and I want to know the answer. You know, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we didn't get that instant gratification around how the story was going to end. But now, obviously, the media model is about keeping people engaged on the platform as long as possible, which leads to binge watching, which is the same structure we use in storytelling for training, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever read Dan Brown, his books, the Da Vinci Code. Like when I read that long time ago, and I remember looking at it, I was like, this is brilliant how he's structured this because, one, the chapters are very short. Mm-hmm. And so it keeps you wanting to go because you feel like you're accomplishing something, right? It's like, oh, man, I just finished that chapter. I can keep going. And so there's this idea that you're moving quickly through it. But he also makes the protagonist a little bit dumber than the average Joe. So as you're reading it, you're like, I already feel like I know what this is going to be, and I'm waiting to find out. I'm waiting to validate, right? Which also keeps me going, and that ties into some of those motivators that I was talking about before. So, you know, with internal motivation or intrinsic motivation, the three main drivers to that is to have a need for autonomy, right? That I make my own choices and my own decisions. A need for mastery. Everybody wants to feel like they are good at their job, and a sense of relatedness, right? That I have community and that I'm functioning as part of a team of some sort because we are inherently social creatures. And so those are three elements that we'll keep coming back to throughout the talk that can be incorporated into learning design to continue to motivate people. So those are three psychological needs that all human beings have, regardless of socioeconomic status, education, religion, what area in the world you live in, where you are in the hierarchy of the company. Those are three human needs that have been identified that we all seek out, right? Yeah. Autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm always looking at as a learning designer is how do I build those three things into the learning design, right? How do I, as someone's going through the training, how do I give them a sense of autonomy? How do I create a sense of relatedness amongst the learners? How do I give them an opportunity to show their competence, right? Because we want to be able to show that we know something, that we know how to do it.
Right. And I think that kind of falls into what Maureen is talking about here. Good morning. Is when we're designing these things. So I think what Maureen's talking about here, right? Number of defects, number of items, rework, et cetera, is the motivation from the standpoint of a quality person. What you're talking about is different. It's the motivation from the standpoint of the person who is executing the GMPs and what outcome are they looking for. An example of that I would use in my trainings is, I would say things like, guys, why do we do all these GMP things? We're protecting. And it's part of what we talk about at the beginning of the chat, right? It's like, hey, thank you for making this awesome food that is safe and good. And I'm enjoying it because of you. That's an externally intrinsically, it's a motivation system that way. And part of that, of what I would say in the plants, Austin, is, hey guys, what we're making in this plant isn't just to put on a truck and send out the door. This goes to people. This goes to families. This goes to your grandchildren. And if you can't be comfortable in giving this to your grandchildren and be confident that it's an amazing product that is safe and won't hurt them, I need to know that. And that's not my motivation. That's their motivation of why they are doing that. And that is key. And it seems like a small thing. It's not. It's huge. What motivates them? Why should they give a damn about GMPs?
Right. And because that's the biggest thing is that, training is a conversation, right? There's the end goal, the outcome that you're hoping for, that business outcome. Sorry, her name is now scrolled past. What was it?
Marine?
Marine, yeah. So she said, I immediately think of measurable outcomes, number of defects, number of items that need rework, duration without injuries. Right. Those are all like great business outcomes. And then getting even more hyper specific with that, I think is really good as well. I think what I see with a lot of learning objectives is that they're too nebulous. They're not specific enough. So going back to like that SMART goal approach to creating a learning outcome, right? Is it specific? Is it measurable? Is it attainable? Is it related to the work that we're doing? And then T is time bound. Right? Is what, are we talking about like we want to see a 20% reduction in rework items within the next 6 months, right? So having a time bound element to it. And then what's great about identifying that business outcome, because what we see so often, we were talking about in the beginning, right, is that something happens, there's a recall and it's like, well, we're going to retrain, right? That's our fix. And it's like, well, by beginning with the end in mind and saying, okay, well, this is the specific thing that we want to affect, right, as a result of the training, then the next question that I ask as a learning designer is what behavior is necessary to affect that KPI? What behavior is necessary to reduce defects or duration without injuries? What behavior does someone need to engage in? And then once I know that behavior, then I can say, okay, well, what information, what knowledge is necessary to drive that behavior? So that's really, the knowledge aspect is like third in the list of what I do. And then the very final question is, well, what kind of learning environment do I need to design to make sure that they get that knowledge that will drive that behavior, that will affect that business outcome? And so that gets into, like you said, when we're designing the environment, don't do the training right at the end of the shift, right? Or do I need to develop this as a digital tool, or does this need to be rolled out person to person, right? Because maybe we have people working out in the field who don't have a computer or an email that they can sign in to do an e-learning, right? So it needs to be done with their direct supervisor. Figuring out language restrictions, right? Yeah. Education limits. Do I need to make sure that this is written at a 4th grade level, or is 8th grade fine, or should this be at a, college level based on who the audience is?
Yeah. So as I'm thinking about this, a couple of follow-ups on this. So when you're setting up your objectives and your goals, you have different audiences. So for Marine's example here, okay, let's take a different topic than food safety. Let's talk about OSHA, for example. So safety in the plant, another major area of training. And the plant has an objective, and the plant manager has issued this objective that we need to reduce near miss reportables in this facility by 3 over the course of the year. We're currently at 5, which is way too high. Let's get this down to 2. And they come to you, and let's say that you're the HR manager and you're responsible for putting this training together. That's the measurable for the plant. It's not the measurable for the worker. So for your example of driving that behavior, so let's say, for example, yes, the PowerPoint thing, I think we've pretty much established, not a good way to do things. It's the exact same thing. It's like Cortland was talking about earlier. Every year in the United States, there are 17 reportable incidents of, who cares? Now, let's take your way of approaching this and looking at it from a behavior standpoint and thinking of it as a story. So there's a training video where there's this knucklehead driving around on a forklift like an idiot, right? And he's screaming around corners and, wow, yeah, look at me, man. I'm getting my work done super fast. And in the video, a worker comes into the warehouse, and you know, it's an older lady, and she's coming around the corner, and she's been working at the plant for 35 years, and she's getting ready to retire, and she's talking about this. And then she comes around a blind corner, and you see this forklift screaming around that corner, and then it stops. And everybody's like, oh, right? And it's like, what's going to happen next, guys? It's like, oh my God, he's going to hit her. Well, hopefully he doesn't. But why did this happen? Let's rewind. Why did this behavior result in this? And let's see what happens in the video. And let's say that he screeches on the brakes and barely misses her, right? And then you have a discussion around that. Why did that happen, guys? Why did that happen? Right?
Right.
Think how effective that is in teaching people on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, and this is a great line from Duncan, where he says, stop worrying about taking a horse to water and making it drink. Instead, focus on making it thirsty. Ooh. And that's exactly what we're doing with, you know, when we're creating these training films and these training tools. And, you know, is how do I create the curiosity within the learner so that they want to figure this out, you know, so that they're actively engaged. So that they're not just going through the training because of an external motivator, which is that if you don't do this, well, there's going to be some kind of punishment. But instead, it's like, well, I want to engage in this. And that's always an interesting question to ask people is, can you imagine a GMP training that your employees are like clamoring to get to, that they're just like so excited to get to? And people are always like, I don't even know what kind of world that would look like. Where. Right. And that's my goal with Sage Media, is like, how do I create that type of content where people are like, yes, I want to know what happens next. I want to see this. I want to talk about this. Because that's the other thing, right? When we talk about creating the opportunity for competence, right? One of those three core psychological needs, when I want to create the need for competence, having a conversation about something is that opportunity to flex your competence, to say, well, this is what I think. This is what I believe. And so now I'm actually engaging as an adult learner as opposed to like a child learner, right? Yeah. And so there's a big difference between designing training for children, which is unfortunately how most training is designed, right? It's designed how we were taught to design stuff from elementary school to high school to academia. It's very deductive. Right.
Yeah. Well, and in that little silly example I put together there, I think part of this, and I'm curious about your thoughts around this, Austin, is as that worker who's watching that scenario of this crazy forklift driver careening around a corner about to hit this person, I can put myself in that position. I could be, oh crap, I could be that person who's about ready to retire who gets killed by a forklift. That could be me, right? I don't want that for me. I don't want that for anybody, right? And then so that gives you motivation to not engage in that behavior, especially for a forklift driver.
Yeah. I mean, if I was watching that, I would put myself in the forklift driver's shoes and be like, I couldn't imagine killing somebody. Like, oh my God, how horrible would that?
Oh, yeah. Now imagine the next scene in that training video is the funeral for that lady who was about ready to retire, and the entire plant is gathered for the funeral and saying, oh gosh, why did this happen? Why did this happen? She was such a good person. And then the forklift driver, just like, his life is ruined now. He took somebody's life as a result of his behavior.
Right.
Oh.
And the same thing with when we're talking about GMPs, right? It's the same level of severity, because people can die. And it's usually, to me, it's as gruesome, but, dying from, a child dying from listeria is like, that's a pretty gruesome way to die. And so a lot of videos that we see from like Stop Foodborne Illness and things like that, they tell those stories about the people who have died. And so those are really good training tools as well.
Well, even why are we attracted to, we see these, like you were talking about with TikTok earlier, we see these videos online, or somebody takes a picture of, something gross they found in their food. It's like, oh my God, I bought some fried chicken and I found a deep fried chicken head. Ah, right? You're able to put yourself in that person's shoes and say, oh God, if I was that person and found the deep fried chicken head, I would never eat there again. Ooh, right? You're able to put yourself in the position of that customer. And at that point in time, you're like, okay, that didn't happen to me, but I can imagine that happening to me. And I've modified my behavior because of it. I'm never, ever going to that particular restaurant again, that chain. Done.
Right.
I don't care what they say. Done.
Well, and even, going back to why we do training in the first place, that one of the big things that I talk about, and I'm also very passionate about, is needs analysis and figuring out why exactly are we doing the training, and is training even needed, right? There's so many times where training is not the answer, right? Mm. So once that business outcome has been identified and the behavior has been identified that will lead to that business outcome, the next question that we're asking as part of the needs analysis is, well, why isn't that behavior happening right now? Yeah. Right? And is it because they lack knowledge, or is it because they lack skill? Right? Knowledge and skill are not the same thing, right? So sometimes it can be a lack of knowledge. Sometimes it can be a lack of skill. Sometimes it can be because of the environment, right? So when we talk about the environmental design, how the plant is set up, how the back office is set up, what the existing culture of the company is, that's part of the environment. So these are all elements that, where there's the assumption that it's just knowledge that needs to be bestowed. It might be these other elements as well, or it could be motivation, right? A lack of motivation. Yeah. So those are our 4 elements that we're looking at when we say, why isn't the behavior happening? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it a skill issue? Is it an environmental issue? Or is it a motivation issue? Because that's going to tell us how we can start to tackle this particular behavioral issue that we're looking at, right? Because going back to the forklift driver, maybe he really wasn't driving that fast, but it seemed like it because of how the environment was designed. Maybe there was an environmental issue of how this was designed that made it unsafe.
Maybe the floors in the warehouse are really slippery.
Yeah. So that's another key issue, because so often we see with these training initiatives that time and money is spent tackling the wrong thing, right? Sometimes time and money is spent tackling the wrong audience, right? Are we even speaking to the right audience to start with? So when I talk about, going back to say sanitation in the plant, right? Is it a lack of someone's knowledge of how to engage in proper sanitation, or is it something further upstream, right? Is procurement cheaping out on chemicals? Was the environment not designed to be cleaned properly? Maybe the employee has the knowledge but doesn't have the skill, right? They haven't developed the skill set to be able to clean properly. It's like, I can pass the test and tell you why it's important and what to do, but when it gets down to the nitty gritty, there's a difference between having that information and being able to have the time to practice a skill. Because I can show you how to play a scale on the piano, and if you don't practice it for 6 months, and I come back 6 months later and I say, okay, play that scale for me again, there's no way. Yeah. Right? You've got to continually practice that. And so incorporating that opportunity for practice is key too.
Yeah. So Maureen had a question here as well. So when you say knowledge versus skill, my mind goes to scaffolding as a learning technique. What do people already know well, and how can we tie the new information or skill to that?
Yeah, exactly. So that's so much of what we do, especially around food safety culture, because a lot of times companies are, will just flat out say like, hey, we know that our food safety culture sucks, and we want to work on it, and we want to design a program to enhance it. And so much of what I do is not come in and focus on all the things that are broken or that are not working, but it's like, well, let's identify what is working. Something there's got to be good. And then how do we start to build off of that? Right. And scaffolding is actually, that's a phrase that we use commonly in the learning design world, because we're scaffolding knowledge and skills on, one, I got to create a foundation and then continue to scaffold this up and up and up. Going back to the concept of cognitive load, right? Like I was talking about earlier, too much information at one time, the brain says, no, I don't want to engage. But if we scaffold it one piece at a time, it becomes much more palatable. And then I don't feel stupid, right? Because I want to be able to prove my competence. Yeah. And so if I feel that I am just not good at something, then I have a tendency to tune out. I mean, I think about myself when I was in school, right? I was like, I'm really strong in English and history, but I suck at math. And so that became the narrative. And I was just like, I just kind of tuned out. Because that was the story I told myself.
Well, and that's interesting because I think in a lot of ways that's kind of turning around. So I'm curious about your take on this, Austin. Is we've been told for most of our lives that okay, everybody has strengths and weaknesses, so focus on your weaknesses and improve those. And really, it seems to have turned around, and people are like, identify your strengths and build on those, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Because then the weaknesses will start to emerge, and we can still tackle that. So it's not just taking this like woo-woo approach to like, kumbaya, but it's like, how do we get the ball rolling? Because when we're just focused on like, well, here's what we suck at, there's inertia, right? That's a hard ball to start moving, but it's like, okay, well, here's what we're doing well. And then how can we start to build on that? And then you start to kind of like slide in additional things where it's like, well, here's where we have room for improvement, that we can continue to focus on.
Definitely. And as Cortland points out too, rightly so, people learn differently. Some people are visual learners, some are audio learners. There's different personality styles associated with these. You need to give people their freedom to approach things differently. So if you work in sanitation or maintenance, you're used to spatially working with things and, okay, here's how this heater head is put together, and here's how you tear it apart, and here's how you look for, to your point, Austin, if you're going through a PowerPoint, no, you're not going to learn that. You're going to learn that on the floor with your trainer and say, okay, guys, here we're going to go through the proper procedures for cleaning heater heads on filling machines. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to look out for. Okay, now you do it. I'll watch you and show you the right way to do it. You need to take those things into consideration.
And that's what I think it's so critical.
So part too, and I think it.
Oh, sorry. There's a short delay on my end. But yeah, what I think is really important there is to do a culture of learning, right? So like you said, instead of pulling everybody aside and doing, okay, we're going to do an hour-long training, how do we include training and education and skill development into the flow of work so that it doesn't become this, we have work and then we have training, right? They become one and the same, where it becomes like a daily or a weekly thing where it's very short touch point, 1 or 2 minutes, 30 seconds, but it becomes part of the culture of, we talk about these things, we're constantly learning how to do our jobs better. And it's not this big ask to get people into a learning, environment, into a training room somewhere to do this massive thing, but it's just these short little bite-sized pieces. So now it becomes part of how we do things around here. And this is,
and so you said something in there that I think is extremely important, which is weaving through our conversation here today, is if you take on too much, people shut down. Right. And so as people are listening to our conversation here today as well, you're not immune to that either. So if you're looking at this and saying, oh, I can't redesign my entire training program and learn this entire new field of information and sell this to management. No, you don't have to do that. Bite-sized chunks. So for an example, we were using this forklift example. Everybody has these. Right? Does it take a genius to create a little? We're inundated, to your point earlier, Austin, TikTok videos and these type of things. And when I first started doing the food safety chat 3.5 years ago, I was terrible. I look back at my early chats; it's embarrassing. But that's how you grow and learn, and you get better at these things. So hopefully, I'm better at it now. And that's the same thing here. Is put together, work with Austin, and put together. Okay, hey guys. We're just going to put together, using this new approach, we're going to put together a quick training video on forklift safety. And here's how we're going to measure it. Here's how we're going to improve it. Here's how we're going to see how the teams in the plant react to it. Now you've got information that you can take to leadership at the plant and say, hey guys, check this out. There's this new approach that we're doing for training, and here's been the results. And they're going to go, whoa, okay, let's do more of that. Where else are doing this? You don't have to build this. It doesn't have to spring out of your head as this complete system that has nothing works that way. Nothing works that way. Start small. Identify these type of programs. One thing that we know for sure in the food industry, and damn it, I'm going to beat on this because I think this is so important. PowerPoints do not work. Quizzes do not work. You're not getting what you want. And the one thing, when I'm working with clients and I get corrective actions back from suppliers or whatever it is, and it says they had this defect, I'm looking for an action associated with that. And the answer comes back, we retrained the people. Bullshit. That is horrible. You did nothing. You wrote that down and you hope that I'm going away. You did. All you have really told me at that point is that your training program sucks. And I'm going to do more sucky training, and that's going to fix it. No, it.
Right. What I would want to see is we revamped our training and put it and measured the effectiveness of change, right? Because I mean, that's what leadership, that's what auditors want to see is, how are things improving? And you were talking about about not getting overwhelmed. You were talking about not getting overwhelmed, and for people on the call right now, going back and looking at, like I said, building on what you have. So take a look at the existing curriculum you have and ask yourself, right? Does this do I have a stated business objective or KPI that will be affected as a result of this? And also, am I speaking to the right people? Right, because those are two areas that you can immediately just look at, and if that's something that you're struggling with, I love doing reviews, of curriculum and saying, okay, well, here's what I'm seeing with the existing curriculum. Here's where I think this is really good. We can build upon this. Here are some areas for improvement. But so it's baby steps, right? Like we're not looking to revamp everything all at once, but starting with, what are those most critical things that you're suffering from right now, and what's the first step that can be taken to start to improve those issues?
Right, exactly. And so, gosh, we're almost out of time here, but that's a great summary around this. It's much easier to go to your boss, and let's continue with our scenario here, and say, you sit down with the plant manager and you tell her, hey, I want to do an experiment to try and improve our training around, and we'll keep the forklift example going here. And, I want to spend a modest amount of money, and I want to get some help from Austin on helping to design a program. And then we're going to measure it, and I'm going to get back to you in 6 months with the results around that. Right? What does that hurt? It doesn't hurt anything. That's an amazing way to approach things. And then when you start seeing those results, then you start building. You start building on these things. And guess what? You start building your skills in that area too. right? And that's what we want, and that's why this chat is done every week. Is we're building these skill sets. We can all learn, we can all grow and improve. And this is a huge gap in every food plant, right? You see it time and time again when FDA writes up a warning letter of 43 for plants of their failures in what I call the blocking and tackling. If you can't get those things right, you can't progress to the next level in that scaffolding. You're going to be stuck at that base. You have to, as a manager, build as well.
Definitely. Yeah, man, this has been a great chat. I could go for another 2 or 3 hours on on this stuff. I love talking about this. And yeah, if anybody has questions about this, you see my email here, austin@sage.media. There's no .com at the end, just .media. And yeah, if you have any questions, send them over to me. More than happy to chat with you, give you some pointers and tips, and see what we can do to continue to move things in the right direction when it comes to the training world.
Right. And so we're scientists. So set up an experiment, set up a design. You're doing an A/B comparison. So here's the old way of doing things versus the new way of doing things, and show that improvement, right? That's how we move forward. Let's see here. So Corlin had a quick question here. Oh, I don't know if we can tackle this one. This is a huge one. How do you move toward a mature quality system? Yeah, I think unfortunately, we're out of time. So that's I think that's an offline type question. So
yeah, Corlin, we'll chat on LinkedIn or set up another Zoom call, and we can tackle that one, because that's an hour-long conversation as well.
Definitely. Cool. So thank you, everybody. Fantastic participation here again. Everybody, thank you. Your inputs, amazing as usual. We appreciate it greatly. So with that, we'll bring our chat to a close this week. And of course, thank you to Austin. He is bringing information to our industry that is much needed, and I appreciate it greatly. So thank you. And
awesome.
Thanks to our audience as well. You guys are the best. So of course, back here next week, same time, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter with the next food safety chat. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend, everyone. You did a great job this week. You earned it, and we will see you back here next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.